Hey everyone, and welcome to the Skylines Academy session on Demystifying DevOps. DevOps continues to be a term that many of our students have asked for more information about, and I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic people here today that can help us uncover the mysteries of DevOps as we've been going down this journey together. Today, I am joined by Shannon Keane, Senior Cloud Advocate at Microsoft, as well as Jason Han, also a Senior Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. And Shannon, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and if you could be so
Sure.
kind as to introduce Jason.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Shannon Keane. I sit on the Enterprise Platforms and Tools team, and I report up through Donovan Brown. And when we were doing all of our prep work for Donovan's session, he had thrown out Jason Hand's name. So I had yet to meet Jason, and it's been a fun reality getting to know him a little bit. So we sit on the same broader team. We just have different mantras. Wouldn't that probably be what you would say, Jason?
Yeah, slightly different charters, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the word. Yeah, different different tactics for similar objectives.
Right. There we go. So he was gracious enough to give up a little bit of time here to help us get a little bit more understanding about the ops side of the DevOps equation. And I think that's something that a lot of folks get a little, a lot of question marks, right? So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your background, or if you want to start maybe unpacking how you kind of got yourself into this realm of DevOps. That might be a really interesting point here for some of the students.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think my path is a little odd. Like most people you talk to, we all come from slightly different backgrounds, and some of us are more system administrator type of people, which is where I came from. Some of us have just sort of been born in the web operations space. I kind of had an early career where I was overseeing IT for a small business. And so I had my hands in a lot of different things. I had some developers underneath me. We had locations around the world. So I had different people at different branch offices and kind of doing different things all over the place. And we managed all of our own internal systems. This was, pre-cloud, I would say. And but when I had an opportunity to take a job at a startup as a really just tech support kind of role, because it was a startup and because, there was only maybe like 15 people in the company, I was, by default, kind of one of the senior people in tech support. And I learned a lot about cloud and, I kind of really supercharged my knowledge about Linux and a lot of the back end things that go on with building systems and maintaining them and all these different things. And so it was that sort of shift into the startup world where I got a taste of this kind of more modern move fast, break things, but monitor it and adjust and improve mentality. It's just like continuous improvement, which was really fascinating to me, coming from a much smaller or not smaller company necessarily, but from a small business mentality where things just moved a little slower. I'm used to like putting out a purchase order to procure servers and get all the network equipment and buy all the the network cables and spend weeks getting it all placed perfectly in a rack with the how it goes. I mean that was the life that I was used to. And now suddenly I can with a couple of clicks, like go acquire all of that stuff and never even touch anything.
Yep.
And it just changed my life, like reshuffled the deck on what was interesting to me versus what I was capable of doing. Like I always felt like building those servers and messing with, salespeople to get the best deal I can on disks and arrays, and that wasn't me. I just wanted to like have the stuff and start building something useful. And now I can do that. I don't have to, like, I can just like go through a menu and say, I want that. And I need it to be this big and this much disk space. And I want this much CPU. And,
Right.
In 20 minutes, I have everything I want. And so it just like, it took all of the minutia and like the boring stuff off of my plate. And that helps me then kind of move on to more challenging problems, which is really sort of the next phase for me. When I moved away from that startup and moved to a different startup, I actually joined as the DevOps evangelist, not even knowing what a DevOps was.
What a DevOps was.
And But I read through the job description, and I had other, friends, I would say, in the startup industry or startup world who were something evangelists. And I was like, well, I know the gig. You're up on stage a lot. You have to build content in the form of presentations, and you probably got to do some writing, and there's going to be some travel involved. And there's a lot of trade-offs, good and bad, for that type of role. But I did feel like I had the right tool set, I would say.
Okay.
And so I jumped in and put my name in the hat for that and ended up getting it. And then, of course, I had to figure out, what does DevOps mean? And fortunately, I was early on exposed to this community called DevOps Days. And it was really the very first event I went to, which was in conjunction with an O'Reilly event that doesn't happen anymore. And I went to DevOps Days, Silicon Valley, and it was there that I met, just so many people that I call my best friends now. And it helped me, give me encouragement and the resources to then organize DevOps Days Rockies, which is like the local Denver chapter of
cool.
DevOps Days. And just yesterday, in fact, I was a guest moderator over at DevOps Days Chicago, which one of the first to move to the online format for the DevOps Days. And it was really great to be involved with all that. So it's really opened up a lot of doors, but it's also opened up just my understanding of what DevOps is. And so as I came in as this DevOps evangelist, I quickly had to explain, what is DevOps? I mean, that's kind of the big part of the role. And so I had to make sure I had a really good grasp, good understanding what it was. And so I really quickly sort of, made friends with a lot of the originators of the term. Patrick Dubois was, him
cool.
and Andrew Clay Schaefer are really the two who came up with the term. And those are two friends of mine now that I can call up on my, on holidays and say hello. So that was sort of my angle, is I want to get to know the people who actually were at the beginning of all this. John Allspaw is another person who has been a huge influence for me, and other people out there, J. Paul Reed, and the list goes on. And all these people I'm so thankful that I, have as friends that I can reach out to and just, bounce ideas off of. But they're the ones who shaped my understanding of what DevOps. And so I guess that's the long way of saying that DevOps, when I said I don't know what a DevOps is, it certainly isn't a person. It's not necessarily a job. It's this cultural change of how we get things done. And at one point I had to come up with my own personal definition of DevOps is bringing together different ways of continuously improving aspects or all aspects around process and people and the things that we're building, the products that we're building.
Yeah,
and
Jason,
so that's all.
If I could elaborate on that, so it's great hearing your story and how you landed in DevOps. And then what was that experience like? You've obviously kind of learned all these new tools and techniques. You met all these people. What was sort of the next experience, going and talking to customers and trying to help them understand it, and kind of maybe walk through that? Was it just a lot of learning all the time as well in conjunction with that? And
well, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I shared today, because I slowly realized the importance of it, is everybody wants an answer. They want a guide to how to DevOps or how to do this thing that's called DevOps and whatever. And anybody who's been doing this for a while and had these types of conversations is always just going to say it depends. It depends on the business. It depends on your scenario. It depends on the product. It depends on the industry. It depends on the timing. Depends. There's just so many things. Nobody's going to give you a quote best practices guide to doing DevOps, but lots of people have the right idea around what you can do to get started, and what are we trying to solve is really the big question to answer. And so a lot of times people will say it's, building continuous integration pipelines, CI/CD pipelines, so that we can get our code and our deployments out there faster and safer and, already quality checked and all these things. And at the time that I was immersed in this whole DevOps world, was working for a company called VictorOps, which specializes or offers essentially on-call as a service type of thing. And so much of the conversations and the debates that I would get into around DevOps and getting started, I obviously had some opinions around what it's like to be in an ops role and to have to deal with things when they break, whenever developers put their new features out into production environments. It usually falls on somebody like me to spend the weekend cleaning up things and putting out fires, and then, just like not enjoying life, not celebrating the release of a new product, but actually dreading it. And that is something I feel, like all the gray hairs on my head are from stuff like that.
Things break in Encore later tonight, right?
Yeah,
And so I like one of the other great evangelists out there, talking about DevOps, Nathan Harvey has this quote that I love using, is like, I'm so glad I got to put down the pager and pick up the microphone, because I just don't want to be on call and like deal with that life anymore, because I felt it. And now I'd rather just teach about the pitfalls and how to avoid it, but also how important it is. And how, like, that's why I wanted to get out of it, is because it's just becoming so important. And I don't necessarily work for an org that has systems and services that need this level of, distributed systems that need this level of monitoring and stuff, that I can get in a little bit here in a moment, called observability. But it definitely solidified my opinions about, if you're going to do, DevOps, if you want to go down that path, almost every conversation you're going to have is going to come back to numbers. We're in a data-driven world where everything we do has to be supported by either theories or data to support those theories. And we don't just do hunch-driven development. So if you're going to build a new CI/CD pipeline, if you're going to, do stuff that makes it so you can deliver features and functionality better and faster, how do you know it's working? Right. And how do you know if you need to intervene? And how do you know if, it's either not working or it is working, but you need to make some changes? Well, the only way to do that is to have something in place that tells you that. So that brings us back again to monitoring and this idea of observability. And that's just the area I've always been in. So I just feel like, I've been like fighting this battle my whole life, and it's really great now that people are like, oh, okay. So even if I really don't want to be an ops person, but I want to develop, kind of modern systems, I want to be a quote DevOps or DevOps engineer, I kind of need to know a little bit about a lot of things, including all that old ops stuff, that system administrator stuff that I never had to mess with. I need to know how that works now. It's just a different world that we're in. And, but I also think that the people that are curious and are hungry to learn and have that mentality, growth mindset, like, this is an exciting time, because there's so many really cool things and going on, and new ideas being shared, and, new tools to try out that really aren't that expensive. And I don't know, it's cool to be part of like these types of conversations.
Yeah. I mean, so let's just say somebody buys into the notion of DevOps. Maybe they see one of your speeches, right? Or they're involved in one of your meetups, or, maybe one of your sessions where you're moderating, and they come to you and they're saying, well, okay, so I sat in on this specific session. I really was inspired. I tried to take this back to the business and I got pushback. What would be some of the ways that you would help that person out? Because I feel like, we still live in this world where it's very kind of waterfally. We think we need all of this executive buy-in. What would be some of the ways you would try and help somebody out if they came up to you and they said, now what?
Right. Yeah, no, this is a great question, because this is something almost everyone runs into, when they try to be that DevOps evangelist. I was more of an outward-facing DevOps evangelist at first, but at some point I did have to kind of pivot and start talking internally to my teams, because quite honestly, I was starting to have this fear that when I go out and I tell someone from stage that you should do this and that, if I come back to the office and we're doing the exact opposite, like, I lose all credibility, the company loses credibility, everything we're saying as thought leaders is suddenly void and nullified. So we have to like do what we say. And a big part of that came down to like things like doing post-incident reviews and moving away from language like root cause analysis and just, what seemed like common, like that's a no-brainer, no duh thing. For most people, it's not, and people kind of rely on the old way of doing things, and until something doesn't work, they're not really ready to change. So you run into static, and people get pushback on, making any kind of changes. Like, what's this going to do? So they need that data again to support and prove out things. But sometimes, we have full schedules. We have a busy day. There's the Kanban board is full. My work in process is maxed out. So where are we going to do this? oftentimes what I see is that there'll be one or two people within, an engineering team or the org in general, and they've probably come across something like you were saying, Shannon, like they've come across a talk, or they've read the Phoenix Project, or Dr. Nicole Ferskren's book Accelerate, which is sort of like the science and math behind a lot of these DevOps theories, and like really makes the connections for people who are like, just prove it to me. Those books show you, or at least that book specifically kind of gives you that type of stuff. So people like to have these concrete examples, like really subjective material to, or not subjective, objective material to like base things on. And so you'll see these small groups of kind of grassroots movements happen, and a lot of times it's around a book club type of thing, where you start getting people sharing the same ideas. Then they come up with these ideas that they want to then pitch to leadership, because at the end of the day, you have to have some buy-in from the leadership. But I think when you come in and you like say, hey, we have identified a problem that we have, and we've identified, we've come up with some options on how we'd like to approach solving these problems. Would it be okay if we could somehow slot these into the backlog of things to do? Because if we do, and our theories are correct, this is going to like 3x our delivery pipeline time. You like have to have some goals and some things in place, and say, I'm not just wanting to do this for fun or because it's the next hot thing. Like, here's where we are. Here's our baseline of like, it takes us 27.3 minutes to deploy any change to production. If I was to make that, we could deploy in 13 minutes and automate, this, and this. You can start to see some real like concrete examples of how that's going to provide improvements. And so you just make those as like, here's my theory, and I just need a little bit of flexibility to test out this theory. I'm not saying stop production. We have to keep pushing code the way we are, but I would like to allow for some of my cycle time, some of my work in progress to be allowed to be worked on. That's, falls into this category of, trying to improve something.
Yeah, and actually Donovan mentioned it on the previous show. He's like, find the most broken thing you can, or the thing that takes the longest, and maybe start there. Was kind of the thing. If you
and do you know how you find something like that? There's a process called value stream mapping, which isn't necessarily a technical thing, and I don't think it's really taught everywhere. Or even that many places in general. But a value stream map is just the idea of actually step by step listing out all the things that happen between, if we're talking about software and products, what is literally every single step that happens between me having that idea while I'm in the shower, and I'm like, that's a great idea, I need to write that down, from like that moment until the first user is experiencing it through their browser and like, whoa, what is this? What is that time? And what are the steps? And what are the handoffs? And where are the bottlenecks? And so it involves like unpacking in a reality type of way, what really does happen. This is the work that's involved. All the other stuff that we do are just, supplemental things, but like this is the work. And if we're trying to improve the work, where can we start? And low-hanging fruit, like Donovan's suggestion, is perfect for that, because you'll see, okay, well, the first phase of this takes, 1 day, but then it sits over here in the QA's like backlog for a week and a half before they get a chance to do anything. So what can we do to address that in small incremental ways that we can measure, and then let's attack that. And just kind of keep in an iterative way doing that. That's why the term continuous improvement, has become such a mantra within the DevOps world, is because there is no silver bullet. There's no way to just solve all your problems. You can't just put in a delivery pipeline and say you're doing DevOps. That's not it. That has nothing to do with anything related to the true heart of what DevOps is.
Right.
It's about trying to, deliver your things to make people happy, and doing it in a way that involves people a little bit differently than we used to do it. And a lot of it's just agile, kind of, with just some salt and pepper on there just to make it slightly different. But most of it's not that hard or complex. And to be honest, I think the challenging part is so much of it is really soft skill. I hate that term, but like,
yeah,
it's changing the way we like think about our work and how we treat each other. And, you know, a lot of the argument between should developers take on-call responsibility, there's a lot of people who just like vehemently say, no, never, that is not my problem. Well, that's the problem. You know, when people say that's not my problem, clearly you're not really interested in the best interests of the user.
Yeah, they don't want the pager, right?
Who would say it's not my problem?
You hit on something there. You know, value stream mapping was a term, but you also mentioned SRE, site reliability engineering, observability. Can you explain those for our users? You know, why that's important to the ops side of the DevOps equation? I think it's a new term for a lot of people still, and observability is so important, as you mentioned. So, we'd love to get your insight on that. Yeah,
actually, you're totally right. The site reliability engineering term is not necessarily new, and that the idea or the role isn't new either. Although in the past, you know, less than 10 years or so, it has taken on definitely a lot more interest, and people have their own opinions on what it means. And the term itself, at least in more modern times of what we hear about SRE, a lot of it originated from a book that was put out by some of the Google engineers, just called Site Reliability Engineering. Very big, you know, thick book, like lots of great information that people have really adopted. I mean, everybody I think realizes they're not Google, they're not going to have Google problems, but there's probably some things in here we can adapt to and you know, and kind of take it from there. So, and actually for today's call, I put together some slides, and so maybe now I can switch over to those,
that'd be great.
And we can walk through some of the ideas that you're just asking about.
Yeah, I think that works.
So I'll share my screen here. Okay.
Good to go.
All set here. So, you know, what we were talking about today is mostly this idea of demystifying DevOps and to the ops perspective. And that kind of leads us into this topic that we were just talking about. Is when we're starting, it almost always leads to this topic of site reliability engineering. And a lot of it has to do with that book that I was mentioning from some of the engineers at Google. And one of the big things that they mention early on that really sets the stage for what's important and how we think about all this stuff now is they introduce this idea of the SRE hierarchy of needs, which is kind of, you know, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you know, you have to have you take care of one concern before you move on to the next. So if we're looking at this, you know, diagram here, we're going to start at the bottom with monitoring and say that in order to build a modern system that we, you know, want to maintain as good high uptime as we can, you know, just we think about things sort of in a 2020 world view type of stuff. Like we're kind of shifted away from on-prem material only or resources only, and we're trying to be a lot more modern about how we do things. They'll start with monitoring, but then they'll lead that into, of course, well, what happens when something goes wrong? Well, you got to have some things in place to actually respond to problems and solve those. And then, of course, you don't just put out, you know, fires and within your system and then not have some kind of analysis about what took place and what can we learn from this thing. And so that you can see how that progresses through that pyramid there. Well, it's that bottom couple of phases, the monitoring, the incident response, and the postmortem / root cause analysis, which I don't really care for the term root cause analysis, simply because there just isn't really a root part of a system, you know, when we're talking about our modern systems. But it's really those bottom three that it's not just monitoring and it's not just alerting and like the on-call stuff. Mm-hmm. It's this bigger idea of observability. Now, observability, you know, I'm not going to be able to really give you the perfect description or the perfect understanding of this because there's a lot of opinions on what observability is. But what I say observability is it's the ability to really ask your system any question and feel like you can get back the correct answer. And that goes to a very, very, you know, minuscule detail, like even the distributed tracing through a system. I would like to know when this thing happens over here, how that affects all the way through my system, and what actually are the little, almost like the value stream. What are the step-by-step things that happen within our system? And I want to be able to have full confidence in my interactions with whatever I'm querying to tell me those things. That is creating this idea of observability. It's almost like saying, I have a pulse on reality. There's no guesswork on what is our system doing. We can actually go in with full, what they call a high cardinality, which I like to say is similar to like high fidelity. Like you can go into just like the most granular, detailed, deep resolution and say exactly what's happening in your system. Then you've reached observability, or that's what we're after when we're talking about observability. But that's still kind of a squishy example. And so usually when I'm trying to go a little bit deeper on this, I'll say, well, don't think of it in terms of monitoring, because monitoring means a lot of things to a lot of people, also depending on their situations. But I can tell you, in a cloud world, we don't necessarily care about some of the stuff that we used to. So things like CPU, things like memory, those are important to us. I'm not going to say that they're not important, but they are not as important, because honestly, in a cloud scenario, I want my CPU usage probably as close to max as possible, so I get what I'm paying for. I don't care if I run out of memory, because I know that I can go get some more resources on demand. So I don't necessarily want to be paged and be alerted in the middle of the night that something like that is a problem, because honestly, it shouldn't be a problem. I can automate that problem away. So what then, that begs the question, well, then what does matter if you can't, if we're talking about automating some of the old school concerns away because of what we can do with technology now, what does that leave us? Well, that takes us to these conversations around service level indicators and service level objectives, where we're actually trying to measure our system based on what users' interpretations of it are. So like Netflix, for example, are people able to watch streams? At the end of the day, that's what the Netflix engineers care about. If people aren't able to watch Netflix, then guess what? Everything else could be green dashboards and things look fine. Nobody's pagers blowing up. Everybody's, unicorns and rainbows, except for the users. They're at home, hopping on Twitter, starting to get angry. So that's where we have to like pivot on, well, what do we care about? And that changes our approach on what matters and what we're monitoring and what we want to look at if we have an observable system. And so that leads me to this next idea, is that what we're looking for oftentimes aren't things that we know are even possible. We've gotten real good at identifying the known knowns. You know that if you're going to run out of disk space, well, your database is going to fail. So that's something we can monitor for and we can prevent in an automated fashion. Then there's the known unknowns. Well, we don't know what would happen if this CPU, this cluster of servers over here just fell over. We don't really know what would happen, but we know it would be bad. That's a known unknown. And we can monitor for those types of things too. It's where we get into the unknown unknowns, where we don't even know that was possible, where we have these cascading failures that just go bananas on a system, and it takes hours, if not days, to recover from. Those are the things, those are the business killers. And so those are the things that we're trying to like catch now, which means you have to have that high cardinality, like digging deeper, what's going on in our systems. And so, and then that leads you into the next thing is, well, if you're going to start looking at that, now we're getting to where we are beginning to understand the real ramifications of a system. So we're not working in these isolated silos where I develop one part of the system and then I hand it off to another part of the system and then somebody else does something else. A lot of that's still going to be there because we specialize in certain things, but now we're working better with each other, and we can have these conversations that say, if this part of the system fails, I understand the failure model and I know what I can do to remediate what may happen, the known unknowns. And then I know what I need to do to, kind of deal with the things that I don't even know what could possibly happen. So it creates this better, systems thinking, real view of the world. Is I guess another way of thinking about it is it gets rid of that idea of it's not my problem.
Yeah.
Everything's your problem now. Everything is our problem. You're part of building a system. We're on a team where we, like we're moving forward in one like uniform thing. We're building something together. So we have to understand how things play or don't play well together.
Right.
So, okay, you're on, you're with me here now. So that means we should just be really monitoring everything and like paying super close detail of like every little thing. And man, if like one disk fills up, I want to know about it. I don't care if it's 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve. I want to know about it. Well, that's not really the case either. So we have to be smarter about monitoring and alerting. And that's where I was talking about service level objectives, service level indicators. That's really where you see the more advanced organizations put their efforts in monitoring. They don't care about some of that other stuff because there's so many things between you and the user of your systems these days that it's really hard to pin down what is a problem on a technical side, let alone like say a new product came out from your product team and they expected it to like 10x the user engagement with your system, and they're only getting like 10 clicks or something. Well, what's going on there? Like why? That's not what was the intended result. So we don't want to monitor that type of stuff because that's way more important to the business than knowing that a CPU has reached 92%. It just doesn't matter. Not in a cloud world. I want to know that my users are not happy. And the thing that I just spent $250,000 on over the past, sprint, if you start adding up all my engineering time and whatever, that was a lot of money. I want to make sure that worked. Like that, I sold that idea to like somebody and I need to make sure it works. Well, how do I know? Got to have monitoring in place, but we got to think about monitoring different. And then that also leads to the alerting thing is nobody wants to be alerted in the middle of the night if it's not, necessary. Nobody wants their thing to be going off all the time because that creates this, this like ghost alert thing where you're like, oh my God, was that my phone that just went off? Like you're always thinking that the beep you hear in the background is like, your systems are melting down. That's not a good like thing to carry with you all the time. Again, I come back to the gray hair. Like that was my life for so long, is like people are out just enjoying life while I'm like on a Friday night, like keeping some brittle system up manually. And, thank God those days are behind us, but there's still things that are important and we have to keep an eye on them.
Yeah, and I think just to hit on this, I think this is so important because I think even as I've talked to clients over the years as they're adopting, say, Azure, they're like, what do I, it's the same conversation around, I need CPU alarm, memory alarm, disk alarm. And to your point, it's like what really matters. It's these service level objectives. And I think it's just it's a different way of looking, not to say to your point that those alarms don't matter. They might be indicators, but they're not the main thing to look at. So
absolutely true.
Interesting.
Yeah, they could very well be leading indicators. We're pretty good at identifying correlation prior. I like to say we're really good because we're puzzlers. We look for similarities in the chaos and try to make sense of what's hard to see. Yeah. But sometimes we get so like head down onto those things and realize none of that matters. None of that matters because, like with Netflix, they use a measurement. I think it's streams per second or something like that. And they expect a certain amount of people around the world to be streaming, like being able to click on stream now. They have a number for that. And if it dips below that, it's, somebody's got to respond because there's clearly a problem. Even if our tech doesn't say there's a problem, there's a problem. So that goes back to the unknown unknowns. We have to find a way to like filter those out a little bit better. And then one other thing too is monitoring and learning is great, but you really can't just treat that stuff in an ad hoc way where it's like, alerts just go to an inbox and maybe somebody sees it, probably not in the middle of the night, or, it goes to your chat platform, Microsoft Teams, Slack, whatever you're using. Again, if you're getting a lot of those, like, do you wake up to your DMs in the middle of the night? No. Right. And I guess it points to this idea that so many of us have gotten into this real responsive posture when it comes to problems. Or I'm sorry, not even responsive. It's more of a reactive. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we should have known better. Like, we knew something was going to happen eventually, right? And so we're always surprised when something goes wrong and we don't have like the right information in front of us, or we don't have the login to the system. Like, it never goes smooth whenever there's a problem. Why is that? Well, it's because we don't take time to like think through what are the problems that could happen and what are we going to do if this does happen. We don't have like you know, I know y'all are in the Midwest. I grew up in Indiana, so we had tornado drills.
Yeah.
And we knew exactly what to do when there was a tornado, even though it never happened. Why don't we do that with our systems? Why don't we put like something in place that says when this happens, these people should get involved, and then escalate to these people, and you know, let's make sure we communicate better. People just kind of leave that as an afterthought, and then it ends up being a not thought, and they don't do it at all.
Yeah, and is that what you think, like on the pyramid you've got there, is that sort of number two? Like you think about that immediately, like as one of the base pieces, like is that in the incident response there? It's not to say, hey, we've just got a ticket routing system. We're actually thinking about how we will respond to an incident ahead of
Exactly. Right. It's not just that we have a firehouse, you know, there's a fire department down the road. It's that the fire department is full of fire trucks, and they're pointing out the doors, and the hoses are rolled up, and, you know, everything's ready to go. There's going to be a fire. I guarantee it. So is it logical to just wing it, or have a few things in place that makes it so that that 30-minute outage is actually a 5-minute outage? And then that leads into the next thing is, don't just let this happen and recur, is let's learn from it. You know, let's learn, if nothing else, let's learn that if we would have just had something in place that alerted Jason 5 minutes earlier, we could have prevented a much bigger problem. Let's at least learn that, because we can then put something very simple in place and make it so that maybe we didn't prevent a problem in the future, but we minimized the impact of a problem. And then we've probably improved something either procedurally or technologically in a way to make, so we've got those better, you know, those failovers, those graceful failing models that says, well, if this API isn't responding with 200 OK, don't just like, you know, blow the whole system up. Just send back, you know, send a response someplace, fire off an alert, and, you know, let's just handle this in a better way. Anyway, that goes back to infrastructure design, but you don't get those types of ideas until you have a good analysis of what took place.
Yeah, I love the
You didn't even know
approach.
you needed to do that. You know what I mean? And if only like a few people who were part of the actual, you know, response to the problem are involved in that analysis, you know, let's just say it's like the three of us. We got to expand on that. We got to like share our learnings with everybody. You know, we can't hoard information like we used to. We used to think that information was our, you know, it's how we kept our jobs, right? Like at least that was the sysadmin thinking, is like, I'm not going to tell you how to do that, because what do you need me for if I do that?
Yeah.
So, but that's again, that's a mentality that doesn't fly anymore. You know, we have to like share everything with each other, because honestly, I would like to go on vacation. So I'd love for you, Shannon, to know how to do X so that we can trade off, you know?
Right. Exactly.
And that goes back to the empathy and the stuff about DevOps, where it's not about, you know, using tools, and there's a lot of great tools to assist, you know, tactically how to implement some of these ideas. But at the end of the day, we're trying to just make it so that our fellow developers and our fellow operations people, you know, we're all solving the same problems, and we're all technical, you know, people, and have great ideas, and we're human beings, and, you know, we should have like a safe space to have conversations openly about creative ideas and be able to fail without bad ramifications. And there's just so many cool things I love about the movement that have nothing to do with tech. And it's more about just, you know, practicing being a good person half the time is what I tell people, is like, just, you know, think about how you interact in what you're doing in your day-to-day job. And are you helping things or making things harder? And then it's pretty easy to kind of look for ways to improve.
Yeah, I always had customers who thought DevOps was going to be the magical, mystical thing that would solve all of their years and years and years of technical debt or siloed ways of operation. And I'm thinking to myself, you guys are missing the mark here, unfortunately, right? It's fortunate because it gives me an opportunity to go in and help educate them, but it's also unfortunate because it tells me they got a buzzword, a buzz term somewhere, and they thought, oh gosh, this is going to save us all. And I'm like, it will, but there's a whole movement behind it, a process.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, let me go ahead and just stop sharing my slides with you here, and we'll come back here, and because I think that's a good point worth chatting a little bit more. I was just, like I mentioned, on a moderation call the other day, and I sat in on a session about where to begin with DevOps. And the first few people that were involved with that conversation, or first few questions, I'd say, had to do with what technologies should we learn, or what languages should we learn. And it's always difficult when that's like the first question out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because it's clear that they have a perception, like already there's like a bias in their mind about what DevOps means. And so, I get like, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like pushing all these squishy ideas is just a little bit too wishy-washy. Like people want some solid concrete advice when it comes to their career. And so the usual typical response is, well, go out and learn Python, because Python has become more popular in a lot of different use cases, both back end and front end. And I think you should go out and learn the cloud, the foundations of building in the cloud, and some of the basics around building infrastructure. And I think that's the future. If I'm like advising somebody on, like, you want a career in this type of stuff, go learn as much as you can about this. The last thing you want to do is become specialized. You really need to know like a little about a lot to be, I think, valuable to a lot of the companies out there that are looking for somebody who can bring new ideas, has that growth mindset, and is willing to learn something new. You can't just come in and say, hey, I'm a Java developer, take it or leave it. Like, yeah, there's lots of use cases, that we use Java, but I need someone who's going to also say, I want to be your Java expert, but also I'm interested in like helping build the entire system, in a better way. Following things like I was just talking about with the hierarchy is like, let's make sure if we want to create some really amazing system that we even know this thing's working. And if it's not working, we have something in place to tell us, and we have something in place to actually respond to it rather than being so reactionary. Somebody who has that mentality and that mindset, that's what companies are looking for. That they bring in this idea of, I don't want to just know the tech, because that just smells like, just tell me the bare minimum so I can go get a job. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's, that won't go very far, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to hit on that. I mean, I think it's just, you brought back a lot of my Encore memories here today. So I'm probably going to have a little more gray myself just as a result of remembering that. But I think it's so important, I think if I hadn't, been working up all those times and worked with app teams and solved problems and, worked across the whole spectrum of technology. It's just, I think it is so important to, like you said, wear a lot of hats and get to know all the people that you support in the organization, right? I just think it's critical. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, mine, like I'm sure, most people's path is all over the place. But I would say that if I look back and try to come up with a list of things that I could pass on, to like help somebody, it was mostly that I didn't try to specialize. I tried to learn as much as I could and get good at what I was interested in, but I don't like this idea of being specialized. I like being flexible, and I like being able to help and contribute in a lot of different ways, because then I become super valuable. Like I can help with this, but I could also help with this. Now, the downside is that you get pulled in a lot of direction, and also you get people dumping a lot on your plate because they know that you can do it. But that, I think that, why is that a problem? You know what I mean? Like that you can manage that, but it's definitely been, to me, I would say my greatest asset is that I had this like just willingness to learn something I don't already know. Like every year I try to find like a new thing I didn't know much about, and not really master it, but be able to at least have a conversation with people about it, and know what it's used for, know what its use cases, if I can help somebody, like maybe you and I are talking and you're sharing with me some kind of problem. I have like some insight into maybe what you could do to, address that problem, or I can connect you with Shannon. I realize, hey, that sounds like, you're dealing with Kubernetes. Hey, guess who knows Kubernetes real well? Hey, you met my friend Shannon here. And like that's a conversation I wouldn't even know I could have if I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have, you know, a little bit of insight on some stuff. So constantly reading, constantly learning from others. I think that's really a skill that shines for a lot of people. And it's almost impossible to not, you know, have that kind of mentality when you really understand that DevOps isn't just trying to learn how to build a CI/CD pipeline, or how to program this, you know, how to use YAML. You know,
Yep.
everybody's going to have to get through YAML.
That should be on a day calendar. Everybody's gonna have to get through YAML.
I'll whiteboard you on YAML. Make sure you can wait. You need to make sure you can YAML.
I sense a couple of like comics, comic book items out of this session. One on the fire trucks and how to relate that to observability, and something around you got to get
YAML?
through YAML.
Yeah.
Yes. Like I think it'd be pretty good. We're almost up on time. Yeah. And Shannon, did you have any other questions for Jason? I think this is super, super insightful.
No, but this was, I always appreciate somebody who's got a background, that's a sysadmin background, right? So that's also my background. And I kind of started realizing things were shifting and changing, and I wanted to be at the forefront versus the laggard, kind of on that side. And I've had so much fun asking questions to folks like Jason, even also the development folks, because it gives them a chance to explain really complex topics to somebody that they can then go make useful, I guess, solutions out of. And so I always appreciate the fact that there are also sysadmins in this space, and we're all like, yeah, I don't understand Git. Like, why is Git so ridiculous? Or YAML, like, what gives, But we actually have a group of folks now who are kind of being moved along in that realm. And I feel like, if anything, all of us can talk to some of those folks a little bit better that are anxious and don't know what the future looks like, and they feel like they're becoming obsolete. And it's like, no, if I can do it, you can do it. I think, Jason, you have very similar sentiments. If you can do it, anybody can do it. It's just a matter of you have to have the right mindset.
Yeah, that's right. And I use that term, growth mindset, but all it means is, you're curious. You're curious about things, which I think most of us are inherently anyway. So unless you're to a point in your career where you just don't want to learn something new, maybe, I don't feel like that's the majority of us. I think a lot of us are just concerned that we don't have a great understanding of how the tech is evolving and where our place is in it. And am I lifting and shifting? Do I have a green field? It's a little more tan. Where am I in my own trajectory of IT, and what do I want to be involved in? So it's scary for sure, I guess, is sort of the sum of that. But it's also exciting. And I think for those who are interested in learning, and I think even, right now with everything going on in the world, we have a little bit more opportunities to learn. There's a ton of content that's showing up online that's available to people. We might have a little bit more free time at home, maybe not if you got little ones, and you're doing that at home learning and all that too. But I honestly, to me, is just that it's that idea of the one thing. I'll leave with this, I guess. I'm one of the few things I remember from college. I don't have a CS degree. I have a business background, and I have a minor in the history of rock and roll, and I don't use either one of those really that much anymore. But I remember this one finance class, which I hated finance. I still hate messing with finance. And it was the first time I'd ever heard the phrase, like, the only constant is change, and like, I've heard it a billion times since then. But it was so cliche. I was like 18 years old. It was the first time I heard this. But I can remember sitting in the seat when that professor said that, and I was like, huh, that is so simple and so perfect. And so I like to bring that up to people. It's like, what they teach first year college people is that things are always changing. And so to me, that you can't just get good at something and expect you're just going to be that forever. The world's going to leave you behind, and so we have to at least think that we got to move with it a little bit. And it's not impossible to just, stay up with the times. There's lots of free stuff out there. But again, it comes to if you're interested in it or not. Are you over it? Are you ready to hang up the IT stuff in general and move on to retirement, or are you hungry and you just want to keep learning and be involved with this stuff? It's not that hard to find the right material to stay on top of these things and have the right conversations. There's people out there like Shannon, like myself, who, you know, make a career out of like helping people who are in that position where it's like, I don't know what to do now, and I don't know how any of this stuff works. And I hear that you can, you know, put data on the other side of the world in seconds, and show, you know, it's fun to be able to like help people realize that you can do those things, and it's really not that difficult either.
Yeah. No, I think that's super insightful, and honestly, this has been a fantastic session. I think cogs are going off now, like you said, Bobo. I don't know, go do a value stream map, right, between the time the ideas come until the time I can write them down. But no, I think it's a great message to end with. And you know, Jason, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Shannon, thank you again for being on the show and helping demystify DevOps. Yeah, and I think that, you know, all our students are going to get just a ton out of this. Yeah, thank you both so much, and looking forward to the next one. So thank you, everyone. We'll end off here, and stay tuned for more on demystifying DevOps. And thank you again. Have a great day.